Don't touch her again! In the middle of a billionaire's grand engagement party, a maid did the unthinkable. She slapped the billionaire's fiancé. Yes, in front of everyone. The room froze, the music stopped, and every powerful guest turned to see who dared to cross that line. Was she crazy? Or was there something no one else had seen? Because just seconds before that slap, something happened. Something cruel. Something no one expected from a woman about to marry one of the richest men in the city. A small girl, just 10 years old, stood trembling in the corner. Tears in her eyes, a red mark on her cheek. And the truth? The truth was about to destroy everything. Power, status, love, even the engagement itself. But here's the real question. Why would a maid risk her entire life, her job, her future, for a child that wasn't even hers? And what did the billionaire do next that left the entire room speechless? This isn't just a story about a slap. It's a story about courage, truth, and standing up when no one else dares. Stay with me, because what happens next will change how you see people forever. Welcome to Heroic Stories Hub, where one moment can change everything. Stories of courage, sacrifice, and hidden truths that most people never see. From the weakest voices to the strongest actions. Every story here will touch your heart and stay with you long after it ends. So sit back and experience a story you'll never forget. Don't touch her again. The sound exploded across the grand hall like thunder, cutting through the soft music and polite laughter. In an instant, everything stopped. Crystal glasses froze mid-air, conversations died halfway through sentences. A violinist's bow slipped slightly, creating a sharp, awkward note before silence swallowed the room. All eyes turned toward the center. Standing there was a young black maid, her chest rising and falling rapidly, her hands trembling, not with fear, but with barely contained anger. Her uniform was simple, neat, but now slightly wrinkled from tension. A few strands of hair had escaped her tight bun, framing her face as sweat glistened on her forehead. In front of her stood Isabella, the billionaire's fiancée. Elegant, powerful, untouchable. Or at least she had been. Now she stood frozen, one hand pressed against her cheek, her perfectly polished appearance shattered by shock. Her lips parted slightly, her eyes wide as if her mind refused to accept what had just happened. You slapped me?" Isabella whispered, disbelief dripping from every word. The maid didn't step back. She didn't lower her gaze. Instead, she lifted her chin slightly. "Yes," she said, her voice shaking but firm, "and I'd do it again." A ripple of gasps spread across the room like wildfire. This wasn't just any gathering. This was the engagement celebration of Daniel Carter, a billionaire whose name carried weight in every corner of the city. The hall sparkled with wealth. Chandeliers shimmered above, casting golden light across marble floors. Guests wore designer suits and expensive gowns, their presence a display of power, influence, and status. And yet, in the middle of all that luxury, stood a maid who had just crossed a line no one dared to cross. "You filthy servant!" Isabella snapped suddenly, her shock transforming into fury. Her hand dropped from her cheek as anger took over her expression. "Do you have any idea what you've done?" The maid's fingers curled into fists, but her voice remained steady. "Yes," she replied, quietly, "I do." Her calmness only made Isabella angrier. "How dare you touch me?" Isabella shouted, stepping forward as if to intimidate her. "You're nothing. You work here. You exist because people like me allow it." The words echoed harshly in the silent hall. Some guests shifted uncomfortably. Others watched with curiosity, their eyes flickering between drama and judgment. But the maid didn't flinch. Instead, she took a step forward too. "I told you," she said, her voice dropping lower, heavier. "Don't touch her again." The room stirred with confusion. Her? Who? Isabella frowned, her brows knitting together. "What are you talking about?" The maid's gaze shifted past her. Slowly, everyone followed that look. And then they saw her. A small girl, no older than 10, stood near one of the serving tables. Her tiny hands clutched the edge of the cloth, her body slightly hidden as if she wanted to disappear. Her face was pale, her eyes filled with fear. A faint red mark stained her cheek. The sight made a few guests exchange uneasy glances. "She's just a child," the maid said, her voice softening slightly but still filled with emotion. "And you had no right to hurt her." Isabella blinked once, then let out a short, sharp laugh. "Hurt her?" she repeated, her tone dripping with sarcasm. "Oh, please." She turned slightly, gesturing toward the girl with careless dismissal. "That clumsy little thing spilled wine on my dress. Do you have any idea how expensive this is?" The girl flinched at her words. "And for that," the maid replied, her tone tightening, "and for that you slapped her?" "It was a lesson," Isabella snapped, defensive anger. "People like her need to learn their place." The sentence hung in the air like poison. The maid's eyes burned with something deeper now, pain mixed with anger. "People like her?" she repeated slowly. "Yes," Isabella said without hesitation, cold tone. "Staff, servants, replaceable." A few guests shifted awkwardly again. Some looked away, but others watched more closely now, because something about the maid had changed. Her anger wasn't wild anymore. It was focused, sharp, dangerous. "No one is replaceable," she said quietly. Isabella rolled her eyes. "Spare me the speech." She stepped forward again, her expression hardening. "And you," she added, pointing directly at the maid, "just made the biggest mistake of your life." The maid didn't move, didn't blink, didn't look away. "Maybe," she said softly, "but at least I didn't hurt someone who couldn't fight back." The words landed heavily. For a brief moment, even Isabella hesitated, but then a deep voice cut through the tension like a blade. "What is going on here?" The crowd parted almost instantly. Daniel Carter had arrived. Tall, composed, and powerful, he walked into the center of the room with slow, confident steps. His sharp eyes scanned the scene. First Isabella, her red cheek, then the maid, then the frightened little girl. His jaw tightened slightly. "Who did this?" he asked, his voice calm, but dangerously calm. The silence that followed was suffocating. Isabella was first to react. "She did it," she said quickly, pointing to the maid. "She attacked me in front of everyone." All eyes turned to the maid again. Daniel followed their gaze. His expression didn't change, but something in his eyes darkened. "Is this true?" he asked, cold, quiet voice. The maid met his gaze directly. No fear, no hesitation. "Yes." A collective gasp filled the room. Daniel's eyes narrowed slightly. "Why?" he asked, low and dangerous. For a second, no one moved. Then the maid turned her head slightly toward the little girl. The child stood frozen, tears silently rolling down her cheeks. The maid looked back at Daniel. "Because she hit her first." And just like that, the room shifted. Not loudly, not dramatically, but undeniably. Because now, this wasn't just a scandal. It was a question, a truth waiting to be revealed. The air in the grand hall felt heavier now, as if every breath carried tension. The maid, Ava, stood still, her heart pounding loudly in her chest, yet her face remained steady. She knew this moment could destroy her life, but she didn't look away. Daniel's eyes were fixed on her. "Explain everything." Ava swallowed hard, gathering the courage to speak. Her voice, when it came out, was softer but filled with emotion. "Her name is Lily," she said, gently pointing toward the little girl. All eyes shifted again. Lily stood frozen, her small body trembling, her fingers clutching the edge of the tablecloth as if it was the only thing keeping her from falling. "She works in the kitchen," Ava continued, sad but clear. "Her mother is very sick, so she comes here to help. She tries her best every day." Lily lowered her head, ashamed of the attention. Ava took a small step forward, placing herself slightly between Lily and the crowd. "Tonight, she was helping serve drinks," Ava said, steady but emotional. "She was nervous. There are so many important guests." A faint murmur passed through the crowd. "And then she tripped." Ava's voice tightened, painful memory. "The tray slipped and some wine spilled on Miss Isabella's dress." Isabella scoffed loudly, crossing her arms. "Yes, she ruined it," she snapped, irritated. "Do you know how expensive that gown is?" But Ava didn't stop. "She immediately apologized," Ava said, her voice shaking slightly, emotional strain. "She kept saying sorry again and again." Lily's shoulders shook as she remembered, crying softly. But before she could even clean it, Ava's tone hardened, anger rising. Miss Isabella slapped her. A loud wave of gasps swept across the room. "That's a lie!" Isabella shouted instantly, her voice sharp and loud. "She's twisting the story." Ava turned her head slowly toward her, controlled anger. "Am I?" she asked quietly. The room fell into silence again, tense stillness. "Then why is her cheek still red?" Ava added, firm and pointed. All eyes turned to Lily once more. The mark was still there, faint but undeniable. A few guests leaned closer, whispering among themselves, uneasy whispers. Daniel's expression darkened slightly as he noticed it, growing anger. "Isabella," he said slowly, low voice, "is this true?" For the first time, Isabella hesitated, just for a second, nervous pause. Then she lifted her chin, forcing confidence back into her posture, fake composure. "It was just a light slap," she snapped, justifying tone. "She needed to learn. She embarrassed me in front of everyone." A heavy silence followed, disappointed energy. "A child?" Daniel repeated quietly, disbelief. His voice carried disappointment more than anger. "She's staff," Isabella insisted, frustrated. "They need discipline, otherwise they become careless." Lily flinched again, scared reaction, shrinking further behind Ava. Ava's hands clenched tightly, anger building, her nails pressing into her palms. "No," she said firmly, strong emotion. The simplicity of her words hit harder than any argument, emotional impact. Isabella laughed coldly, mocking laugh. "You're just a maid," she said with sharp cruelty, cold insult. The insult echoed through the hall. Some guests looked uncomfortable, others avoided eye contact. But Ava? Ava didn't break. For a moment her eyes glistened, hurt, but then something changed. She straightened her back, quiet strength. "My place," she repeated softly, pain turning into courage. She took a step forward, determined. "My place is standing up for someone who can't defend herself, confident and strong." The room shifted again. This time, the energy changed. The whispers weren't about scandal anymore. They were about truth. Daniel remained silent, watching everything closely, deep observation. His eyes moved from Isabella to Lily and finally to Ava. "What's your name?" he asked, calm but serious. "Ava," she replied, respectful. He nodded slowly, thinking. "And you're willing to lose your job for this?" he asked, testing tone. Ava didn't even blink. Yes. The certainty in her voice stunned many. "Why?" Daniel asked, his tone quieter now, but more intense, searching for truth. Ava's expression softened slightly, emotional shift. She turned to look at Lily again. The little girl's tear-filled eyes met hers, seeking safety. "Because," Ava began, her voice trembling slightly, vulnerable, "I know what it feels like." The room leaned into her words, silent attention. "I grew up just like her," Ava continued, painful honesty. "Poor, invisible, afraid." Her hands slowly unclenched, releasing tension. "People treated me like I didn't matter," she said, heartbroken. "Like I wasn't even human." A few guests lowered their heads slightly, guilt. "I remember being shouted at, pushed around, blamed for things I didn't do," Ava added, voice shaking. "And no one ever stood up for me." Lily's crying softened as she listened, emotional connection. "So tonight," Ava said, taking a deep breath, building courage, "I decided I wouldn't stay silent." She looked directly at Daniel. "I won't let that happen to her." Protective and strong. The words hung in the air like a promise. Daniel's expression changed, just slightly, but enough. Something in his eyes softened, internal conflict, something human. But Isabella wasn't done. "This is ridiculous," she burst out, outraged, her voice breaking the moment. "You're believing a servant over me?" Daniel didn't respond immediately, silent tension. His gaze slowly shifted toward Lily. He walked closer, his steps calm and measured, controlled movement. The crowd parted slightly to give him space, respectful distance. When he reached her, he crouched just enough to be at her level, gentle approach. Lily froze, her breathing uneven, nervous. "Did she hurt you?" Daniel asked softly, calm and kind. Lily hesitated. Her eyes flickered toward Isabella, fearful glance. Then toward Ava, seeking comfort. Ava gave her a small reassuring nod, encouraging. Lily swallowed hard. Then slowly, she nodded. "Yes," she whispered, scared confession. That single word changed everything. The room fell into complete silence, not the kind filled with curiosity, but the kind filled with truth. And in that moment, the balance of power shifted forever. The silence after Lily's quiet confession felt overwhelming, like the entire room had stopped breathing at once. Daniel remained crouched in front of her for a moment longer, his expression unreadable. Then slowly he stood up, his posture straight, his face calm, but there was something different in his eyes now. Something colder, something final. He turned toward Isabella. "Isabella," he said quietly, his voice steady but carrying authority that filled the room, "apologize to her." The words landed like a shockwave. A loud gasp rippled through the guests. Isabella blinked rapidly as if she hadn't heard correctly. "What?" she said, her voice rising. "You can't be serious." "I am," Daniel replied without hesitation. The calmness in his tone made it even more powerful. Isabella took a step forward, her face turning red with anger. "I'm your fiancée," she shouted, "and you're telling me to apologize to a servant?" Her words dripped with insult. Daniel didn't react emotionally. He simply looked at her. "And she's a human being," he replied. The simplicity of that sentence echoed through the hall like truth no one could ignore. Isabella let out a bitter laugh, shaking her head in disbelief. "So this is it?" she said, her voice trembling with rage. "You're choosing them over me?" Daniel paused for a moment. The room waited, every eye fixed on him. Then he spoke. "I'm choosing what's right." Those words didn't just answer her question, they ended everything. Tears filled Isabella's eyes, but they weren't soft tears. They burned with anger and humiliation. "You're making a huge mistake," she hissed. "Maybe," Daniel said calmly, "but hurting someone weaker than you? That's a bigger one." The silence that followed was heavier than before. For the first time that night, Isabella had no power. Her voice, her status, her position, none of it mattered anymore. Daniel turned away from her. "Security?" he called. Two guards immediately stepped forward from the edges of the hall. Their presence alone made the tension rise again. Isabella's eyes widened slightly. "Daniel, what are you doing?" she asked, her voice suddenly less confident. "Please escort Miss Isabella out," Daniel said calmly. The room erupted into whispers. "You're throwing me out?" Isabella shouted, stepping back as the guards approached. "From my own engagement party?" "No," Daniel replied quietly. "From mine." The words hit harder than anything else. Isabella's face changed completely, humiliated. "This isn't over!" she screamed as the guards gently but firmly took her arms. "You'll regret this, Daniel, I promise you." Her voice echoed as she was led toward the exit, but Daniel didn't look back, not even once. The doors closed behind her with a soft but final sound. And just like that, the storm was gone. But the silence that followed felt deeper than before. No one spoke, no one moved, because everyone in that room knew they had just witnessed something powerful, something rare. Daniel stood still for a moment, then slowly turned back toward Lily and Ava. The tension in his face softened. He walked toward them with calm steps. Lily looked up at him, her eyes still wet with tears. He stopped in front of her and crouched slightly again, bringing himself to her level. "I'm sorry this happened to you," he said softly. Lily nodded slowly, her lips trembling. "No one should be treated that way," he added. She wiped her tears with the back of her hand, her fear slowly fading. Then Daniel stood up and turned to Ava. For a moment, they simply looked at each other. Ava lowered her gaze slightly, humbled, unsure of what would come next. "You stood up when no one else did," Daniel said respectfully. Ava swallowed, her voice quiet. "I just did what I felt was right," she replied, modestly. Daniel nodded slowly, approving. "That's not easy," he said, "especially in a room like this." Ava gave a small, emotional smile, grateful. There was a pause. Then Daniel spoke again. "From today," he said, his voice clear and firm, "Lily will not work here anymore." Lily's eyes widened instantly. The guests murmured softly. "She will go to school," Daniel continued, kind and strong. "I will personally take care of her education, her home, and her future." Lily stared at him as if she couldn't believe what she was hearing. Bewilderment. "Really?" she whispered, trembling hope. "Yes," Daniel gave a small nod. Tears filled Lily's eyes again, but this time they were different. Joyful tears. She stepped forward suddenly and hugged him tightly, overwhelmed. "Thank you," she said softly. The room watched in silence, many faces softening. Then Daniel turned to Ava again. "And you," he said, thoughtfully, "you're no longer just staff." Ava blinked, confused, her brows furrowing slightly. "I want you to work with me," he continued, "in my foundation." Ava blinked, stunned. "What?" she whispered. "We help children like Lily," Daniel explained. "Children who need someone to stand up for them." Ava's eyes filled with tears. "And I think you're exactly the kind of person we need," he added. Ava shook her head slightly, overwhelmed. "I don't know what to say," she said, her voice trembling. "Say yes," Daniel replied gently. Ava let out a small, emotional laugh through her tears. "Yes, yes, of course," she said, grateful and happy. For the first time that night, the room felt warm, not because of wealth, not because of power,
but because of humanity. Guests who once watched silently now looked at Ava with respect. Some even nodded quietly, as if acknowledging a truth they had ignored for too long. Because in that moment, something had changed, not just for Lily, not just for Ava, but for everyone watching. Daniel looked around the room one last time. "Let this be a reminder," he said calmly, "a strong message that no position, no title, and no amount of money gives anyone the right to treat others with cruelty." His words settled deeply into the hearts of those present. "Respect is not earned by power," he continued. "Clear truth. It's earned by how you treat people, especially those who cannot fight back." Silence followed, but it wasn't uncomfortable. It was understanding. And as the night slowly continued, one thing became clear to everyone there. The most powerful person in the room was not the richest, not the loudest, not the most feared. It was the one who chose kindness when it was hardest. And sometimes all it takes is one brave voice to remind the world what truly matters.